Welcome back, folks. So, we introduced some basic family structures earlier today, the nuclear family and extended family structures. But what kind of diversity can we see within family context and how do they manifest? What are the outcomes? So, let's dive into it. So, first of all, let's talk about immigrant families. Many families emigrate to a new country and a new culture, often to change their circumstances or to seek opportunities, sometimes even fleeing from life-threatening situations like violence or famine. So immigrant parents tend to emphasize education more than those born and raised in the US. So they believe education is the best means to achieving a successful life, kind of this ideology of opportunity. And immigrant families tend to place more emphasis on devotion and loyalty to family than those born in the US, this idea of familism. However, sadly, immigrant families can often experience a significant drop in economic and social status when arriving in the US. So maybe in their country of origin, they were well off socially and economically, but when they moved to the US, it dropped significantly, almost like having to restart in some cases. Also, foreign-born children are often exposed to more microaggressions and racism. And of course, all these factors can have implications on a child's development. What about single parent families? So families headed by one parent. This is a growing family structure in the US. In fact, over half of all children live in a single parent household. This structure has been linked to some potential behavioral, social, and or academic challenges. Many researchers argue that it's not necessarily the presence of only one parent that's the issue, but rather the other factors associated with single parenthood. For example, only one income instead of two. They could experience more financial stress and have fewer resources as a result, which consequently impacts the child's development. However, much of the research on single parent families focus predominantly on white families, which gives a very limited perspective, right? So some cross-cultural research suggests that these outcomes might not always be representative of all children. For example, going back to that idea of extended family structure, having extended family in the household is common in many minority families. So even if there is only one parent in the picture, the child may still have a network of kin providing support in these cases, which could help buffer some of these potential negative outcomes we listed up here, outlined in the mainstream research that does predominantly focus on white families. So just one thing to consider. These outcomes may not always be the case. It's going to depend largely on context, like the example here about having a network of kin. Despite having one parent, there's a network of kin, grandparents, aunts, uncles, etc., that provide support. They have a village, so to speak, to help them out. Now let's talk about same-sex parents. So we are seeing an increasing number of same-sex parents, same-sex families. So they're having children through insemination, through surrogacy or adoption, and children of same-sex parents have been found to have very similar outcomes as children of heterosexual parents, despite some previous misconceptions in the past. So there's similar levels of behavioral adjustment, peer relationships, and psychological well-being. And there doesn't seem to be a significant difference in their own gender identity or sexual orientation compared to kids of heterosexual parents. So there's generally positive development and adjustment with same-sex parents. Now, last stop here is distressed families. So particularly, we're going to talk about poverty. So about 21% of US children live in poverty, and about 43% are considered low income. So economic hardship is very common in the US, and it impacts virtually all aspects of family life, like housing, healthcare, access to education, to recreation, to safety. It trickles down and impacts so many areas of a child's life, and it often increases parental stress. How does this influence parenting practices? Well, it impacts their overall attitude and self-worth, which can lead to potential depression. In turn, there may be less nurturing, using more physical punishment, and being less consistent when interacting with the child. There's just some potential outcomes we can see in parenting practices as a result of this poverty. It's a very high stress context to live in. Parents will often emphasize obedience in their children as a value that they have to possess in order to make it in the world. That's what we'll often see. Living in poverty can really put families in survival mode. So children are at risk for lower cognitive ability as well as physical and mental health problems. It really can impact all areas of development. So it's such an important issue to tackle and to implement policies to offer remedy for, because no parent or child deserves to live in survival mode like this. So that was poverty. That was our context here for distressed families. So that covers this section. But next, we're going to talk about some different contexts beyond family. So thank you for joining, everyone, and I will see you there.